Welcome to Tarrant Area Food Bank. Thank you for joining us for our workshop today to talk about how we start seedlings indoors. My name is Lauren. I work for Tarrant Area Food Bank, and you will usually find me out in our learning garden. So we hope that at some point you'll join us out there to do some outdoor gardening. But today we're going to talk about some gardening that you can actually do inside in the hottest part of the summer or the coldest part of the winter. We hope that you'll take a minute to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box. Tell us who you are, where you garden, if you're new to seed starting, or if this is something that you have done quite a lot of. During this presentation, we hope that you'll chat in questions as you have them, and we hope that you will also share tips and ideas if you have other ideas and ways of doing this. Indoor seed starting is a fantastic project. It's a great way to garden even when you can't be outdoors. This is a great rainy day project. We're going to talk about the basics of how to do this. We'll talk about some ideas for starting seedlings at home if you're gardening at home. We're also going to talk about how that might shift a little bit if you are starting for a large garden like a community garden. Now, there are a lot of different ways to start seeds indoors. Some will tell you that they like to use soil blocks, and that's a fantastic option. You may have some DIY options. You may have some purchased pots. So we're going to talk about lots of different ways of doing this, and please know that there are more ways of doing this than I'm talking about today. So we hope that you'll enjoy learning a little bit with us. So it's important to know that whatever season you're in, you're going to be starting seeds for plants that will be in the opposite season. So if you're in the warm season right now, you're starting cool season crops. If you're in the middle of December or January, you're going to be starting your spring and summer crops. So just remember that when you pick out your seeds, you want to make sure that you're choosing the right season. If you signed up for this class through Eventbrite, the planting calendar for which crops can be grown in which seasons is attached to this. Also the handout for the class. So we hope that you will access both of those. The other document that was attached to the Eventbrite link is a seed storage guide. Sometimes you'll see that called a seed viability chart. So that's a great resource as well, because it's going to help you know how long your seeds are actually still good to use. Now, Tarrant Area Food Bank helps to supply community gardens with donated seed. Often we are provided with a large amount of seeds that are pulled off the shelves at retail nurseries or hardware stores at the end of the season. And then we are able to provide those out to community gardens and those who are trying to grow food. So we hope that you will know that just because they've come off the shelf, just because they've met that expiration date, does not mean that they are no longer good. It just means that they will not sprout not as many of the seeds would sprout as if they were 2 months old and straight off the shelf. So use that guide to kind of gauge how long your crops are still going to grow. Usually that ranges between 1 and 5 years. If it says 1 year, so for instance, onion seed, you should not count on that onion seed sprouting if it's past that expiration date. If you are moving on into the 2 and 3 and 4 year range, make sure that you're planting more seeds. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, more about that as we get into the demonstration as well. I do want to mention that if you are looking at your planting calendar, there is a note about, or there's a color coding really, about if you should be planting your seeds for that particular crop straight into the ground. That's called direct seeding. Or if it's a crop that is better to plant a plant or a transplant. So what we are doing today is starting seedlings that would then become transplants. We always want to think about 4 to 6 weeks ahead, sometimes 8 if you're trying to build in some buffer time if it doesn't work the first go round. So do keep in mind that if you want to put your transplants in the ground in September, then you want to make sure you're starting about 6 weeks before that planting date to start them indoors. Now, if you were hoping to plant tomatoes and eggplants and peppers in your garden, you can plant those plants right now, but you don't have a large enough window to get them started, to start them from seed at this point. So, and it is a little bit on the late side even to get them in the ground, but if you want to do that, go ahead and pick those up from a nursery, a local nursery that sells transplants. Also know if you are using your SNAP benefits, if you do have SNAP benefits, you can pay for food producing crops using your SNAP benefits. So keep that in mind. It's a great resource. We want everyone to be able to produce food for your garden, for your home, for your community in the most effective way possible. So we're going to jump right in. Please let me know if you have questions as we go through this, and we will try to answer everything we can. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is talk about how to set up our grow shelf and also how to pick out seeds. So I'm holding up several seed catalogs. This is the fun part, right? You can go through and choose, once you know what season you're planning for, you can go through and choose all of the wonderful seeds that you want to purchase. Or if you are working with donated seeds from Terranea Food Bank, we hope that you will enjoy learning about what you can grow for the season that you're in. So let's talk a little bit about setup. If you are growing these at home, your setup might be a sunny windowsill. Now, try to go for a sunny windowsill where you're not going to have pets jumping up to knock over your little seeds starting. That is a subject of a lot of frustration for those who are trying indoor seed starting for the first time. That's why I don't grow a lot of indoor seeds at my house, because if you do have indoor pets that like to nose around in the soil, you may want to put your seed starting operation in a separate room. So go ahead and get your light source. If you have space for it and you have the resources for it, it's a good idea to start a grow shelf that has lighting that mimics daylight. So you want to look for daylight bulbs. We're going to pull up a picture of our seed starting shelf. We start in a normal season, we start most of our own plants actually indoors. So this is a picture of our fall crops from last year. So you can see we have some baker's racks, and then we have daylight light fixtures that go on each shelf. We're going to also show you a picture of the bulb just so you have a sense of what the wattage is and kind of what to look for. This is a question I get pretty frequently, so I did want to make sure that you have a chance to actually see what we use. These are just long tubes that go all the way across. Now we grow, when we're starting our own plants, we're growing anywhere from 600 to over 1,000 plants in a season. We need a lot of space for that. If you are just starting enough seeds for your home garden, of course, you don't need to build anything this size. You may just want to replace an incandescent light with a daylight regular screw-in light bulb, and that may be enough for you. If you are growing just with the indirect sunlight that's coming through a window, that is perfectly okay. Just know that your little plants may try to reach a little bit further for that light. So it will be very important for you to turn your tray each day so that the stems, they're going to bend towards the light, and you'll want them to bend back the other direction so that you get nice, straight, strong plants. We can talk about some troubleshooting with that as well as we get started. So you've created your space, you've picked out your seeds. The next thing that we need to do is think about what supplies we need for starting seeds. Now, this can be a huge range. If you are starting at home and you just want to grow a few plants, you may want to use some DIY, kind of do-it-yourself, repurposed items. So this is a great one. It's an easy one that many of us have at home. It's just a milk jug. So what you can do is just take a milk jug, cut the bottom off. I've left about 1 inch or 2. This is a great way to create a shallow germination tray. Also works great if all you want to do is grow microgreens. So that's little bitty sprouts that you cut off to put on your salad or on your sandwiches. This is all you need. You're going to poke holes in the bottom. Make sure that you sanitize any containers that have food in them. Please do not use any chemical containers or containers that were storing something toxic to start any kind of food crops. Other ideas for things that you can repurpose at home are little single-serve ice cream cups or yogurt cups. Of course, if we're having the little ice creams, those are sometimes foods. We don't want to have too many of those, but if we've had a celebration and we have a bunch of the little cups, those can work perfectly because you wash them out, sanitize them, punch some little holes in the bottom, and then you can take that plastic lid off the top and put it underneath to catch water. Anytime you have a container, you want drainage holes on the actual container, and then you want a tray of some sort to go underneath it to catch your water. If you have something like this, you could just use a cookie sheet or a baking tray of some sort, and that will catch any drips so that you're not ruining the surfaces underneath. Now, a question came through about how we store seeds. Seeds can be refrigerated to make them last longer. That's how I store my seeds at home. I have a metal can and sealed packages of seeds. They stay in my little seed vault, my little seed can, and that stays in my refrigerator. And those seeds, even though normally on the seed viability chart they would only last 5 years, I still am having good germination rates at 10 years. So that's something that you can do. It is not something that you have to do. If you do refrigerate, make sure that you put them in a plastic bag of some sort to keep moisture out, because sometimes our refrigerators do get moisture in them. If you have a paper seed package and then you put it in the refrigerator and it absorbs moisture, your seeds will not do you any good. So seal them up, put them in the fridge, and that will help them last longer. If you're not storing them in the refrigerator, just keep them in a cool, dark place away from moisture. Make sure that they're not going to get wet is the key ingredient. And make sure that they're not being stored, you know, every now and then I will forget and have a seed package in my pocket and I'll leave it on the dash of my car. Texas summers are not kind to seeds that are left in their car. So just remember to keep them cool. So we've set up our little grow shelf. We're thinking through picking out containers. So we have a lot of great DIY options at home. If you want to use an eggshell carton, that's a great idea for germinating seeds. My preference is more towards the plastic or styrofoam. They're not as ecologically friendly, but they're better, in my opinion, for starting seeds because you can poke drainage holes in the bottom and they're very easy to sanitize. The cardboard ones, although you can plant them in the ground when the plants get up a little bit, they tend to mold and they absorb water, and so they dry out faster, and there's no way to sanitize them. We want to make sure that we're not risking salmonella contamination when we're growing food crops. So just keep some of those thoughts in mind as you choose the containers that you're using at home. Now, if you're growing the number of plants that we are, if you're growing for a large garden or even a large home garden or a community garden, you're going to want to think a little bit bigger and probably purchase some, or, you know, ask a nursery to donate some of your seed starting trays. And there are a lot of options here. It's a good idea to have some germination trays or flats. That can be just a shallow, this is a little deep for a germination tray, but you can see there are no drainage holes in this one, so you would want to create a way to drain a little bit. But just a shallow tray that goes all the way across that doesn't have individual cells is a good idea for getting a lot of seeds started and about 1 inch tall, and then you can carefully move those to larger pots as they grow. Or if you're going to grow microgreens, a long, shallow flat like that can be perfect. And then all you have to do is put your seeds in rows or sow them through the whole surface of the soil and then cut them and harvest them as they're ready. So having those on hand is great. A lot of people will use Jiffy Plugs. I do not have those to show you today, but you can, that's an easy search if you would like to look at that online. These are the little dehydrated pellets that are wrapped in mesh. And what you do is you have a whole flat of those and you soak the whole thing with water. They pop up into little balls of potting soil and you plant your seeds in those. You will hear mixed reviews on these. Some gardeners absolutely love them because they're simple, they're straightforward. You just hydrate them, plant your seed, cover the seed up, they grow, and then once they have roots, you take that ball and plant it in a larger pot or plant it outside. In our setting, I find that those dry out a little too quickly for what we need. So that is not something that we typically use in our larger production, but it is something that's available if you want to try it as a home gardener especially. And there are community gardeners that enjoy those as well. So if you've had good luck with that, please feel free to chat that in and share that as well. It's okay as gardeners if we have different opinions about what works well and what doesn't. There are lots of kinds of gardeners, so we'll all share together and that will give us some great tips that we can try out. So what we use for a larger scale production is something that has a smaller cell. So we might use a tray like this that has a number of individual cells and fits down inside of a flat. So there's drainage holes on the bottom of these, and then we can actually put water in the tray and it will soak up from the bottom. And there are a lot of plants in this one flat, in this one tray, and so we don't have to take up a lot of space. If we're producing 1,000 plants, we want them to take up as little space as possible at the beginning and as little potting soil as possible at the beginning. And then when the plants are larger and more established, we can transfer them to a larger pot of potting soil. This is also a really good thing. To have a smaller container is also a good thing because when you have less potting soil, you have less chance of fungal issues happening or mildew attacking or staying in your potting soil and attacking your little baby plants. It attracts less fruit flies. There are just so many good things about having less soil until you have larger roots. When the roots are there, then you can move up to more soil. So we start small and then we bump it up. We have really found the little 6-packs to be helpful for our style of growing. They're large enough cells that for some of our crops, we don't necessarily have to bump them up to a 4-inch pot. We can take them directly from a large 6-pack size directly to the garden if we need to, if we don't have the time or the space to bump them up to 4-inch pots, and that's really helpful for us. Another option is you can get sort of these 2-inch individual pots. These work really well. Also, they are more durable, and so you can rewash them and reuse them. The 6-packs do wear out eventually, and then you can just replace them and keep your trays. So lots of options there. We do sanitize ours between uses. So you'll notice these were used last season. So typically what we would do is scrub these with a brush, a toothbrush, some soapy water, try to get some of any fungal issues that we had in the previous season off before we start our new ones. We will often rinse them with water and about a 5-gallon bucket of water with about a 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar. Now, I have had the question, what's the exact amount to, sterilize them? And I can't really give you that answer very well. This is just kind of our way of trying to get them as clean as possible. Now, many community gardens will tell you they don't even take the time to sanitize between seasons because it's not a large enough scale operation that it makes a huge difference. So you're going to make the best decision that you can. Just know that if you sterilize your containers and start with fresh, clean containers, you're less likely to lose some of your tiny, small baby plants. So just kind of a here's what we do. Y'all please share what you do as well. And chat in if you have any more questions about how to choose containers. When you're buying seeds from seed catalogs, a lot of the seed companies actually offer trays. So that's kind of an easy one-stop shop if you are looking for something like this that's a little bit larger. Or you can go to garden supply shops or locations to ask for that. Now, when your plants start getting a little bit bigger, you're going to want to bump those up. That means taking them from the little bitty plant and putting them in a larger pot of soil. Once their roots get all the way to the bottom of these 6-packs, and you can start to see roots coming out, that's a really good sign that you have a good healthy plant, good healthy root system. Then it's time to fill up your little 4-inch pots. These can just be saved from a nursery year to year and reused. We've reused these for probably 3 or 4 years. So reduce, reuse, recycle, right? But you can't recycle black plastic in a lot of places. So keep it out of the landfill, use it until you can use it no more, and go ahead and put your soil in and then put your baby plant inside of it. These we put on baking trays because the flats on 4-inch pots do have drainage holes. That's great, that's a good thing, but we put them on cookie sheets or baking trays. Do know that these get heavy when you fill them with soil and water. So know yourself and know your gardeners for your location. If you are going to have volunteers lifting these, make sure that they're light enough for the volunteers that you have to do this safely, to pull them off the shelf full of soil, full of water, and carry them in and out to the garden. Double trays also work. If you're okay with a heavier load, you can get 2 flats on a double baking tray. I saw a great question about using plastic dome covers. Yes, those are great. They can be a good option. If you have a seed starting tray that comes with plastic dome covers, you can put that on and that will reduce your watering some. It kind of creates a greenhouse effect. Some of them even have vents that will allow moisture out so that they don't retain too much water. So those are certainly a good option if you have them. We tend to use saran wrap or plastic wrap when we first plant, and I'll show you that today. That is something that works and most of us just have on hand, and it keeps, when the seeds haven't even come up yet, it keeps the moisture as close to the potting soil as possible. So that's what we use to start with, and then as the plants get bigger, of course, one of those dome covers is just fine. So once we have our containers selected, then we need to start thinking about what's going to go in the containers, right? We know about the seeds, but we also need to talk about the soil mix or the potting soil. Now, I've had people ask me, you know, can I just dig up soil from the garden and start in that? And really, you shouldn't do that. People certainly do it. But if you're starting seeds inside in little bitty tiny containers, that regular soil has several problems. Number one, it's heavy and it compacts. And so it's hard for the roots to really get established. There's not enough air for an indoor system in the soil. So it's easy for them to get waterlogged, and then your plants die from lack of oxygen in the soil. So you want to have potting soil, which is a lighter mix of peat moss, vermiculite, perlite, some of those other lighter components. And the other piece of this is that it's sterilized. So you're not introducing to your tiny little baby seedlings fungus from the garden, gnats from the garden, other pests that might be in your soil, other diseases that might be in your soil. You're allowing them to get large and established before they're introduced to those pathogens. And that's part of the reason that we would start seeds indoors, right? And that's probably a good question that I should have started with, right? Why would we even want to do this? Why do we want to start seeds inside? Sometimes it's because the weather outside is so lousy that we just want to do some gardening and it's inside. and we can get them started and then put them in the ground later. But often it's because we can actually grow a healthier plant. In this part of Texas, and we're in Tarrant County area, right? So in this part of Texas, if we don't start our tomatoes indoors, we can't plant them early enough to beat the Texas summer heat, so we don't get very many tomatoes. So a lot of the reason for starting indoors is that you can establish a large plant and then put it outside when the temperature's right. It also can help us beat pests. So if there is a certain pest that attacks your crop, if you're starting it indoors, sometimes you're allowing yourself to miss that outdoor window when the pest would attack your plants. So certainly don't have to start indoors, but those are some of the reasons for doing so. It also gives us a lot more variety and selection. If we are purchasing our plants at our nurseries and at our hardware stores and garden centers, we're going to get some great, healthy, already established plants, and that's a great option. And we're also going to be subject to whatever the nurseries decided is the most profitable for them to purchase for their nursery, right? Because they have to make sure that they sell whatever is purchased or grown by them. And so we don't always have the same variety selection. We might get 2 to 4 options on peppers. We might get 2 options of broccoli. When, if we choose from a seed catalog, we might get 100 possible varieties of that same crop. So it allows us to choose what we like, what we think is interesting, what has the nutritional content that we're looking for, what we want to cook with. So lots of reasons to start indoors. So we have our potting soil. You'll notice I have 2 bags up here. This is what we actually use. We use our potting soil. This is just a premium potting soil for transplants that are in our 4-inch pots. It's great. It works well. Doesn't have fertilizer added, so we add our own nutrients later when the plants get big. Then we use seed starter mix on top. This is a little bit coarser. You can see, I'm going to hold these up. I wish you could feel the texture of these so you can actually know what I'm talking about, but for today, you'll use your imagination a little bit. So this is just a coarser potting soil. The seed starting mix is much finer. It's softer. It's going to make better contact with the seed. So the seed starter mix is more expensive than the regular potting soil. We're always looking to do this as effectively as possible. So what we do is put the potting soil on the bottom, fill it up to about 1 inch of the top, and then we're going to top it with our potting soil. No, with our seed starting mix. So potting soil on the bottom, seed starting mix on the top, and that way we get the best of both worlds and save as much as possible in the process. So the process now, once we have our potting soil, we have our containers, is pretty straightforward. The first step is going to be to mix water into our potting soil and into our seed starting mix if we're using that. This is absolutely critical. If you don't remember anything else I said today, remember potting soil and put water in it. You'll remember me saying this same thing if you joined us for our container gardening class, because it's so important. If you remember back from your science class, or if you're trying to teach your children about science lessons, the reason this is important is because water is attracted to water. So if you do not have water in your potting soil before it goes in your little containers, when you go to water your containers, the water is just going to run off the sides. Or if you put water in from the bottom, it's going to have a harder time soaking up into the actual cell where the seed is. So it's really important to start your plants off right and go ahead and add that moisture. Now, I want you to know that adding the water, it always takes more water and more time than you think it's going to take. I went ahead and mixed in the water to both of these containers before we started this. So I'm going to demonstrate what I did, but I want you to know that it takes a lot more water than this, and it would take about 3 or 4 times the amount of time that I'm demonstrating to you. So don't get frustrated when you start doing this at home and it takes you 4 times the amount of time. That's just how long it takes. I just cheated. I did some of mine early. So I am going to answer a couple of questions while I am stirring this water in. So for sterilizing pots, what we do is just soapy water, rinse them, and then we do a rinse of about 5 gallons of water with about a 1/4 cup of apple cider vinegar. Now, that is not an exact recipe, that's just what we do. Professional organizations will often recommend using something like a very properly mixed, diluted amount of bleach in your water. We tend not to do that just because we are working with volunteers and often with children, and we want to make sure that we are not going to accidentally get wrong concentrates of something that might be dangerous. So if someone has specific recipes that they want to use for that, please share. And I am happy to look up some more research if you want that further. We find that what we've been doing works well enough that we're not losing a lot of plants, so I feel pretty good about that. It's sort of our thing that we do to try to go above and beyond and make sure that we're doing everything as well as we can. If you don't do this step, I know other community gardens that have great success as well without doing this step at all. So there's the knowledge and what we do. Also, brown leaves and gnats on bell pepper plants. That's good questions. Gnats in a seed starting environment often come from too much water. If you're seeing gnats, then your little seed starting flats are probably staying too wet. So it's probably a good idea to try to balance that moisture out and keep an eye on them, and that can be tricky. We also find that putting a fan in our room to circulate the air in our room where we're starting seeds helps us to maintain correct moisture levels. Sometimes the brown leaves on little seedlings can start from fungal issues as well. So it may be the same problem causing both of those. If you do get gnats, you can use your apple cider vinegar again and just make a little trap. The gnats will fly into that apple cider vinegar, and that's a good way to catch them, but you also need to address the cause, which is probably too much moisture. So you can see all my magic is done, right? Normally this would not be ready, but I've mixed in the water ahead of time, so it's perfect. You know you have enough moisture in your potting soil when it is damp enough that you can squeeze it and it stays in a ball. It doesn't just fall apart, but it's not so damp that moisture is coming through your fingers when you squeeze it. So you want it to feel like you've taken a kitchen sponge, gotten it wet, and then squeezed all the water out of it. That level of dampness is how the potting soil should feel when you're finished. So once you have your potting soil ready and you have all the water mixed into it, at that point, all you have to do is add it to your container. Now, if you are filling a lot, I'm only going to fill one of these 6-packs today, right? Because that's all I need. So I'm just going to put in the potting soil by hand. Now, if you were filling up 12 of these trays, because you were about to do a lot of seed starting, what you would do is just cover them and just kind of rake them in. You could even use a thin board and just spread it over. And then go back and tamp it down a little bit to actually settle the soil in itself. Now you'll notice I said tamp it in a little bit, right? We want it to be secure in there. We don't want to have a big air pocket in our cells, but we also don't want to have it be like concrete. We want the seed to be able to grow through it easily and well. Now, we want our cells to be filled up to about 1 inch from the top. So if you can see down in there, I have about 1 inch of space from the top of the container to the top of my potting soil. Now that's just about exactly the height that I want. Typically, we do not start larger seeds indoors anyway. Things like watermelons are usually going to be started outside. Things like peas, beans, those are usually going to be direct sown into the garden. Now there are circumstances more and more where people are starting watermelons, cucumbers, pumpkins, okra inside. I typically find that those do better just direct seeded, so that's what I do. But if you are using the larger seeds like watermelon, cantaloupe, any of those that you're trying to start inside, just know that those seeds have to be planted a little bit deeper. So you can still fill the cell to an inch, but you're gonna have to poke your hole about a half an inch to an inch deep instead of a fourth of an inch, which is what we're doing today. Today I'm planting broccoli seeds because that's one of the first crops that's gonna go in the fall. Things that we start this time of year for our garden are broccoli, Swiss chard, collard greens, kale. We do mustard greens. We're going to start bok choy and kohlrabi indoors. So all of those crops do great in cool seasons. Lettuce can be started indoors. These are all things that right now, if you tried to plant those plants outside, it would be way too hot, but you can go ahead and get them established and then plant them outside later. So I have an inch from the top. Now, for most people, from your tip, the tip of your finger to the first knuckle is about an inch. If you want to estimate, that's just fine. If you're trying to teach a skill or if you just like to be exact, great idea to use a ruler. If you don't want to get your ruler messy, you can always mark the bottom of your seed label, put a line at 1 inch or half an inch or a quarter of an inch, depending on what measurement your seed is going to be planted to. So now let's figure out, how do we know how deep to plant our seed? Now that we have our soil, what do we do? So we're going to take a look at the back of a couple of seed packages. So that's going to come up on your screen because I know there's no way you're going to see this, right? So I'm going to hold up my seed package, but you're going to see some other seed packages come up on your screen as well. And this is something that is your best friend in this whole process. Whether you're direct seeding to the garden or you're growing indoors, learn to read your seed packages. Every company does their seed packages a little bit differently. Some are done with pictures, some are done with graphs and charts, some are done with writing. Regardless, the important information is going to be on the back of your package. So one thing that's really important is planting depth. So you're going to see how deep to plant this crop. Now, in the picture on the left side of your screen, you'll see that that's depicted with a picture as well as the written measurement. And then on the right side, this is, another seed package. They do theirs in a little chart. So what you're looking for is how deep to plant the seed. Now, that's going to be true if you're planting your seed in the garden or if you're planting your seed in a pot indoors. So use that as your depth. The other important information on here, we were talking earlier about seed viability, right? And how long your seeds are good. So look for your expiration date. They all have them. Some are at the bottom, some are at the top, some are on the side, but look for your expiration date. This is going to help you know how many seeds to plant per cell. So if your seed package is from your current year, I think it's still a good idea, even though you're probably going to get 90 to 100% germination rate. Germination just means your seed is going to sprout, right? So if you are going to get 90 to 100% germination rate, you could just plant 1 seed per cell, but planting 2, even if it's a current year package of seed, gives you that buffer so that if something goes wrong and you have a dud seed, you don't have empty cells that you've just wasted potting soil on, right? 1 seed is going to cost you a lot less than having to throw away potting seed soil. So go ahead and put 2 seeds in. Then for every year above that, go ahead and add an extra seed. So if it's last year's package of seeds and it's a year expired, go ahead and add an extra seed and plant 3. If it's 2 years expired, go ahead and plant 4. If it's 4 years expired, go ahead and plant 5. Beyond 5 years old, most of your seeds are not going to germinate. And so at that point, you might want to use them for other projects like education about what seeds look like, or throwing them on an empty patch of soil just to see what comes up out of interest. But you might not want to use them in indoor seed starting. So just kind of keep those dates in mind. Other important information is on here, like when to plant for your area. So you'll notice the map of the United States. It will tell you for your region when you should plant them. You can also use the Plankton Calendar that we've attached if you would like to do that. It gives you helpful information about spacing your plants for when you actually put them in the garden. So I highly recommend saving your seed packages. You may want to get a little plastic, kind of like for baseball cards, and slide your seeds down in there so that you have all this information saved. You may want to just keep them in Ziploc bags that you store in a box. However you do it, or you may want to take a photo and just keep a digital album of all of your information. However you want to do it, hang on to these because it's all you need to know. A lot of them now are even putting QR codes so that you can scan them with your phone and get all the planting information online. So some of them can be very, very high tech. So I just wanted to show you guys where to find that. So my seeds today that I'm planting, these are broccoli seeds. They're going to go 1/4 inch deep, and they're on the old side. This is a package of seeds that it's almost time to let go of. So I'm going to go ahead and put in 4 or 5 seeds per cell. Now there are 2 ways to do this. If all you're doing is 1/4 inch deep, you have your potting soil in your cell. You can just drop your seeds in and then cover them with 1/4 inch of soil, which is how I like to do it. Or you can go ahead and add your soil, your seed starter mix on top first, and then go back and poke 1/4 inch holes and drop your seeds in. Neither of those is wrong. Those are both perfectly acceptable ways to do it. It's really about what is easiest for you to make sure that you're getting the seed depth correct. So if it's easier for you to measure by making a little hole, then go for that. If it's easier for you to measure by just topping it off, then do that way. So I'm going to do it the way that works for me, and I'm going to drop my little seeds in. Now I try to space my seeds out in the cell. If you're just planting 2 seeds, you can put them both in the middle and then clip one if they both sprout, you just clip out the extra one. If it's something like broccoli that you can eat the little snips of, then save those little snips and rinse them and throw them on your sandwich, right? And you have some great broccoli microgreens that cost you basically nothing, right? And actually, it looks like that's the question. I didn't realize that was a question until I started talking, but that was a question that actually came in as well. If they all sprout, what do you do? So the answer is, kind of depends on your preference and what the crop is. If it's a tomato plant and you get 2 or 3 little sprouts inside of your cell, tomato plants don't mind the stress of being carefully divided. So you divide out those 2 or 3 plants and then move them each to separate 4-inch pots. Tomatoes do really well with that. They actually do better if you separate them and transplant them, in my experience, than if there's only 1 per cell. So if it's tomatoes, you're not going to eat the tomato plant because the tomato plant is dangerous for you, right? But if you're growing a leaf crop like kale, mustard, lettuce, broccoli, which you can eat the leaves of as well as the broccoli green, right, or the broccoli flower. If it's any of those crops, any brassicas, then all you do is just snip out the extra plants. Now wait until they have 1 or 2 true sets of leaves, right? Because anything can go wrong up until that point. So wait until they're big enough that you know they're both going to survive. Then clip out the smallest one, the weakest one, the one that doesn't look like it's quite in the right spot for you. Clip it out with a tiny pair of snips or scissors and collect them in a little bowl, rinse them and eat them. They're great. I would recommend, if I'm telling you to be as careful as possible, do clean your scissors or your snips after you do your harvesting, so that they're ready for the next time, so that you're not introducing any diseases from your garden, flipping things outside, and then you bring that disease inside to your crop. Okay, so we've added our seeds. Now it's time to add our 1/4 inch of seed starter mix. Now, this is something that typically I would just visually estimate, but you can, if you have a little mark, you can certainly take that and just kind of estimate out, okay, this is where it needs to go, so that you're making sure you don't get it too deep. If you plant it too deep, it's going to take a longer time for your little sprout to come up. If you plant it too shallow, it's going to have a harder time being sturdy and getting the nutrients and water that it needs to grow in a healthy way. So a lot of research has gone into how deep to plant those seeds. So definitely take advantage of other people's work. Don't make your life harder by planting it twice as deep as it's supposed to go. Okay, so I'm just topping this off. And remember, you didn't see me add water to this seed starter mix, but I did. And it's the same level of moisture as our potting soil. It's nice and soft. It's a very fine mix. And that's going to help our broccoli seeds maintain the moisture that they need to be able to sprout. And that is it. You've now planted your 6-pack of broccoli. Now we may luck out, right? Maybe all those will sprout and we'll have, 24 or 30 little plants come up, and then I'll have enough sprouts for an entire sandwich, and that'll be fantastic. So now I'm just going to spritz these with just some fresh, clean water in a spray bottle. I think that this helps to settle any air pockets out of that top seed starter mix, and just make sure that it's fully hydrated, and you don't want it to be dripping, right? We worked really hard to not have dripping potting soil. You don't want it to be dripping from this either. So you're just going to get it wet, and then you're going to cover it with plastic. This is where that either the covered saran wrap or plastic wrap or some kind of covered dome comes in. If you're using the little single serve containers that I mentioned, sometimes those have a plastic lid. You don't want to put it on completely, right? You want to leave a little airflow, but you can cover it up with that as well. So if I had filled this entire flat, I would just use my plastic wrap to cover the entire flat. If all I have done is plant one, if I just have one plant that has started, or maybe I just have 1 or 2 containers, then I'm planting in I have a little 4-inch pot planted. I could also use a just gallon bag like this and just put it loosely over, and that's also going to create a little greenhouse. So that's another option. Sometimes if I have children out to the learning garden and we're doing a project of starting seeds and it's something we're sending home, these also work really great as a low mess option for the drive, right? So seal it up in a container, and this is a mini greenhouse. And then when the kids get home, you can just open a little bit, and that allows a little moisture out, but it maintains moisture inside the bag as well. Great place to put your label. If you're just doing one container, then this is a great place to write all your label information as well. So we have a great question that's come in, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But since I've mentioned labels, I want to point out what I'm talking about with labels. Labels are what keep you sane once your little plants start coming up. They're really important, especially if you're growing for a community garden or a large garden where you're trying to grow multiple varieties. If you're growing at home, the worst thing that happens is you don't remember what you planted until it starts to fruit, right? Not a big deal. But if you want to label them at home, so when your friends ask you what that amazing tomato was or what that fantastic variety of broccoli is, you're actually going to remember. Go ahead and make your label. These are also really helpful and important because they help you remember when you planted them. This is important for those of us who start seeds and then check them every day and wonder why they're not coming out, right? On the back of that seed package that we looked at earlier, another valuable piece of information that's on there is germination time. Sometimes it'll say days to germination, germination time, days to sprouting. Any of those things are the information that I'm talking about. So sometimes it'll say 2 to 3 days. Sometimes it'll say 7 to 10 days. That's a really big, important difference, right? So when you're making your label, go ahead and write what you planted. In my case, I would write broccoli. Then put the date that you planted it. That's going to help you remember how many days it's been. I also like to put how many days it's supposed to take. And that way, if I don't have my seed package with me when I go in to check on my new baby plants, I can go, oh, okay, it's supposed to take 7 to 10 days. It's only been 3. I shouldn't worry yet. I should make sure they have enough moisture. I shouldn't worry. So look at my date, look at how many days. And then if you want to add an extra piece of information, you can also put the variety. So for instance, this broccoli is Sun King Hybrid. So I might want to write Sun King Hybrid on here so that if I like this kind of broccoli, I have a note that it went well, and I know that next year I should buy that package of seeds again. If it did not go well, I know not to order that variety of broccoli again, and I might try something different. So it's good to keep records. It's not the end of the world. We often get a crop that is mislabeled and they still taste good. They're still food, right? It's still important that we've grown them. Now, how many labels to make is really up to you. If it's for your personal use, do what you think you need to be able to remember what you've grown. If you're growing in a community garden environment, and you're going to have lots of hands helping you move plants from the cell to a larger pot, I highly recommend putting a label in every single cell. And that way, when it's time to move that baby plant up to the bigger pot, you can just take that label and put it straight in the 4-inch pot, and that way you don't get plants that are mixed up. So you don't accidentally have an habanero where you thought you were going to have a banana pepper, right? You don't accidentally have collard greens growing where you wanted to have broccoli and vice versa. So it just helps you keep things straight. Now, I do find, in my personal opinion, the seeds often sprout better in the cells that don't have labels. I haven't quite figured that one out yet, so if anyone has insight on that, I would love to know. Not sure what we're doing there when we put our labels in, but sometimes that does affect our germination. So if you see that happening, you might consider putting your label somewhere else or labeling it in a different way. And the question that I see came through is about changing soil in small containers. And I think what we're talking about here is like the 4-inch pots. So I think please clarify if I'm not understanding the question well, but what I think I'm hearing is if we have a pot like this that we bought an herb in from a retail nursery, and maybe the plant didn't live, or maybe we still had soil in the pot for some reason, can we just put seeds in it and start fresh? Like start with a new plant but in that same soil? So that's the question I'm answering. If it's not the question that you meant for me to answer, please feel free to chat in so that I can clarify a little bit. I would use fresh soil. So if I have soil left over in my pot from my own seed starting, and when I say soil, again, I mean potting soil, either from the nursery or from a failed seed starting event in my own seed starting process, if there's extra soil, I throw it out. So if I end up with 12 4-inch pots that didn't grow something, or it did grow something and then they die, if it never came up at all, I'm likely to just put a new seed in it and try again with that same potting soil. But if something grew and then it died for whatever reason, didn't get enough water, got too much fungus, the plant didn't make it, I'm not likely to reuse that same potting soil to try to grow a new seed because something went wrong and I don't want to have the same thing go wrong the next time. I will put this in, if I have a pot of potting soil that didn't work out for whatever reason, I will put that in my compost pile. Now, a lot of you may say, whoa, I would never put my potting soil in my compost pile, right? I'm just gonna put grass clippings and leaves and that kind of thing in my compost pile. So that's what I do. It's also okay to just toss that potting soil into a flower bed, maybe where you're not growing vegetables. So those are some options if you don't want to put it in the landfill, but I wouldn't reuse it for seed starting. I hope that answered your question. Let me know if it didn't, please, and I will try again. What other questions do you have about how to grow things? So I guess one question it would be what to do next, right? We have our seeds, we have it watered, we have it covered. What now? Now put it under your light source. If you're using grow lights, when it's at this stage, good idea to put it 1 to 2 inches from the light source. The warmth and the closeness to the light will help your seeds to grow in the correct way. It helps prevent etiolation, which is a big word for long, leggy stems of plants. So it helps to keep your plants strong and healthy. As your plants grow, you're going to be looking for the first set of true leaves. When they first sprout, they're going to have the 2 sides of the seed coat, which are called Cotyledons. You're going to see a picture come up on your screen to show you what I'm talking about here. There's also a great picture on your handout for this course that will show you a plant with a cotyledon. So these are the cotyledons of collard greens. And these little heart-shaped leaves are not leaves. They are the 2 sides of the seed coat. The first 2 weeks of your seed growth, those little cotyledons provide all the nutrients your plant needs. Now, a couple of weeks after that, you're going to start seeing a set of true leaves. These are going to look more true to the shape of the leaves for the plant. So go ahead and watch for that first set of true leaves. Once you get 1 to 2 sets of true leaves, and your plant is about 2 inches tall or even a little bit larger, you can go ahead and carefully remove those from the small cell and bump them up to your larger pot. Make sure that you're covering the soil from your plug or your little small soil container, right? And covering that with the soil that's in your new 4-inch pot to make sure that it's staying at the right depth and not drying out. So do watch for that. The picture on your handout has cotyledon with 1 set of true leaves, so that'll give you a closer picture to look at as well. Take care of these, keep them watered, water from the bottom if you can. When they are about 4 to 6 inches tall, you can start hardening them off. That means to slowly introduce them to outside. If you have a fan in your seed starting room, that's going to help create some strength so they can stand up to wind and temperature fluctuations, but you still want to introduce them slowly to the outside environment. Good idea to do 1 hour on the first day, 2 hours on the next day. I like to put them in shade, don't put them straight in the hot sun, especially for fall crops. Then 3 hours the 3rd day, 4th, and so on until you get to at least 5 days and your plants are then ready to plant outside. If you don't have a grow light, this question just came in, it's okay to plant in a sunny windowsill. Just know that you will need to rotate your plant and so that the stems don't just bend in one direction because they will grow towards the light. If you're finding that your little plants are getting too leggy before they put on good leaves, you can also try getting a light bulb that's a daylight light bulb that goes in whatever area you've got, and try putting your plant up higher so it's a little bit closer to that light. As your plants get big, if you do have a grow shelf or a light that's above them, make sure you're staying at least 4 to 6 inches from that light source so you don't burn your leaves once the plant's at that stage. Other questions coming in? Portable greenhouse, excellent. Greenhouses are a great option. If it's an outdoor greenhouse, just be aware that if you're putting an outdoor greenhouse that doesn't have shade cloth and is completely sealed outside in Texas summer heat, it's going to be too hot to germinate and keep safe your fall and winter crops. So just make sure that you're paying attention kind of to the temperature range. If you have a little mini portable greenhouse that's indoors, so that you have a cooler season, then that's fantastic. Now, on the flip side of that, if you're trying to start spring or summer crops and it's still cold outside, a portable greenhouse might be a great place to do that. Just pay attention to the intensity of the light. I appreciate you guys joining us today. If you do have other questions, we hope you'll join us for more classes in the future. You can join us on Eventbrite to register for those classes, and we look forward to seeing you more soon. Happy gardening.